With the hiatus of the ReZero web novel underway, I want to talk about the most interesting aspect of the past few chapters, the death loop mystery. I believe Tappei has dropped enough hints to explain how and why Subaru got trapped in the death loop, and this video will explain the entire process behind it. This video will actually require you to do some homework. Before watching this, you will need to understand how Aldebaran's ability works, so you will need to watch my other video on the topic, linked above. Once you've done that, we can start with the theory. Now, I would like to thank a commenter who pointed out this theory in a comment, which allowed me to then piece together the concept of this theory. The non-caring Cosmos Dingus pointed out that Subaru didn't gain Ao's witch factor and authority, but simply Subaru was present where Ao last activated his territory, and then Subaru assumed Ao's role and he therefore entered the death loop. Whilst this sounds weird, this is most likely what happened and what Tappei is hinting at, and this video will actually prove it to you. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say Subaru assuming Ao's role, you again need to watch Ao's ability video to understand what I'm talking about. So where do we begin? Well, we first need to establish a concept that Ao's territory overrides Return by Death and takes priority. This may be controversial, however many people can actually work this out based on Subaru's first visit with Medium and Ao to Yorna's castle. When Subaru tries to escape, it's obvious that Ao's territory is active, mainly since Ao directly saves Subaru and Medium from death multiple times. Now, since we know what Ao's power is, it's obvious that Subaru and Medium died many times during this escape. However, from Subaru's perspective, he never died at all. However, from Ao's perspective, he was in the death loop, and he had to keep looping to save Subaru and Medium. This is very evident in the dialogue in which Medium states that if Ao didn't tell her what to do, she would have died, or when Ao blocked an attack that would have killed Subaru. The reason why Ao knew these attacks were coming was because he witnessed Subaru and Medium died to these attacks. He then looped, and then he saved them. Since we're reading the story from Subaru's perspective, we never actually witnessed Subaru die. So it obviously shows that Ao's ability supersedes Return by Death. And for those wondering if we do know if Ao's ability is active at the castle, since we do know this because Ao directly mentions it when he visits Subaru and the others at the inn. Now, of course, the most incriminating thing is that when Subaru first dies in the death loop, the scene changes to the Shadow Garden with Satella. The narration states that Subaru is dragged in. However, afterwards Satella asks where Subaru is, seemingly indicating that Subaru isn't fully traversing into the Shadow Garden upon death like usual. Later on, when the death loop is closed and Obart touches Subaru's soul to undo his shrunken form, Satella appears with this statement, "I found you." In other words, during Subaru's death loop, Satella was unaware of where Subaru was, so this means, as we speculate, that Ao's authority does take priority over Return by Death. And if you still don't believe me, Subaru himself states that the death loop was separate from Return by Death himself. So if you don't believe me and my evidence, then at least listen to Subaru himself. Now, with those variables discussed, I'll explain exactly what happened in the order of events using all of the information Tappei has dropped to then explain it. Subaru, Ao and Medium try to escape Yorna's castle. This causes Obart to use his technique on Medium, Ao and Subaru. We know from the latest chapter that Obart's technique directly interferes with the old, or your soul. We learn this also from Abel's explanation of the soul marriage technique that Yorna uses. The soul and old are one and the same, is essentially your sense of self. Knowing that Obart's technique affects the soul is very important because witch factors are bound to your soul. This is something we know from Arc 6. Entities such as witch factors are rejected from Odlagna. They cannot be cleansed and stripped of their memories to be recycled. This is actually one of the main reasons why Louis Arneb is randomly in the Hall of Memories. With these pieces of information, we can now explain what happened. Olbart hit Al with his technique. Now, at the time, Al's territory was active. Since Al's technique is likely due to a witch factor bound to his soul, then this interference caused by Olbart prevents Al from controlling his ability. However, the most important aspect is Al doesn't know that his technique has been disabled, so Al thinks his ability is still working as normal. However, it isn't. Al's territory is still active, but it's still active at the castle. It's not moving with Aldebaran like it does in other side stories. So as stated, Aldebaran's territory is active at the castle. Aldebaran has lost control of his ability, and he's unaware that his ability has been stopped. We also sort of know this because at the inn, the conditions for his ability was not met. This is during the loop where Olbart kills everyone in the inn except for Abel. Aldebaran specifically states that he couldn't use his gamble because the conditions were not correct. Remember, Al's ability has conditions for him to activate it. However, do you remember what happened later on when Al got into the alleyway with Subaru and Medium? He randomly collapsed. This makes sense when you look at it from the perspective of Aldebaran. At the inn, Al thought he could use his ability, but he didn't meet the conditions, so he died. However, in the alleyway, he tried to activate his abilities because the conditions were met. However, he couldn't because he just realized that he lost his ability. This is the reason why he randomly collapses and he says that he's useless. And if you don't believe me, Al literally says that the reason he's like this is due to the old man, confirming that Olbart's strike interfered with their soul and then, of course, affected Aldebaran's ability. Now, as you can imagine, Subaru then goes to meet with Olbart, who's on top of Yorna's castle. As stated before, he then enters Al's territory, which is still active at the castle. Remember, since Al was hit with Olbart's attack, he lost control over his ability, so Al's territory is still active there because Aldebaran never deactivated it. Maybe Aldebaran thought he deactivated it, but of course by then he already lost control of his ability, so his ability is just going to remain at the castle. So then, of course, Subaru then enters the territory range, which is at the castle, and then due to the fact that the territory's owner is Aldebaran, who's not actually present in the territory anymore, the ability was then applied to the next person who's the most compatible, which would then be Subaru. This is of course a main reason why Subaru returns by death at the inn when he's killed by Olbart, but when he's killed at the castle he death loops, because Al's territory is only active at the castle. Subaru then takes the role that Al had during the fight during the escape of the castle. In other words, Subaru retains his memories upon death. This is the reason why he compares it to return by death. However, it's a return by death which lacks love. During this, as stated before, Satella cannot keep track of Subaru due to the fact that the territory overrides Return by Death, and then later on when Olbart interacts with Subaru's soul, Satella comes out, finding Subaru. I know someone might ask, why is it that Al lost his ability but Subaru still has Return by Death? This is actually easily explained. Al's ability is bound to his own soul, so when Olbart interfered with Aldebaran's soul, he was affected and his ability control was removed. However, Subaru's Return by Death is controlled by Satella, who is present inside of Subaru's soul, which we see, by the way, in the Shadow Garden. So even if Subaru's soul is affected, Satella can still control Return by Death. Either way, that should explain the whole process. In short, Olbart removes Al's control over his territory whilst at the castle during their escape. Al didn't realize that he lost control until the alleyway scene where he realized he lost his ability. Subaru entered the still active territory on the castle and assumed Al's position. Due to this, Satella lost track of Subaru and then appeared when Olbart interacted with Subaru's soul, unleashing darkness in the world. And with that, that's the theory, and I believe that's what Tappe was hinting at. Are there any flaws with this theory? Do you disagree? Do you agree? Let me know down below.